You are now listening to the Go Getter Showcase, a weekly podcast highlighting the elements of success within professional and entrepreneurial women from various industries in all walks of life. I'm your host, Lindsay Joseph. Welcome back, everyone. Hope you're all having a wonderful, wonderful day. I have to say, I am so really impressed with my guests for season 2 of the Go Getter Showcase thus far, and I'm really excited for some of the other people I already have booked to start doing some interviews. So over the next few months, you're definitely going to be excited with some of the people that I'm going to be presenting to you via this podcast. But before we talk about who's going to come on the show in the future, let's talk about today's guest. Today's guest is Quiana Abgai, and she's been covering urban life on her blog Harlem Lovebirds since 2009. A graduate of Wellesley College with 8 years of both ad agency and client-side experience, in 2014, Quiana took the leap of faith into launching Trifecta Media Group, a marketing, PR, and graphic design firm with her New York City-based sisters. The Trifecta Media Group caters to small companies spanning industries such as health and wellness, entertainment, and technology products, allowing Quiana and her sisters to use their agency experience to champion their goals. Additionally, through Quiana's blog and experience as an entrepreneur, she's been able to speak at social media conferences such as BlogHer, Blogalicious, Mom 2.0, and Altitude Summit, covering topics such as privacy, using social media for change, and using one's blog to pivot other business opportunities. In this episode, Quiana discusses her journey from Columbus, Ohio to Boston, Massachusetts to attend Wellesley College and the influence that it's had on her, how her experience in advertising and her love for journaling resulted in her starting her blog Harlem Lovebirds when she became a stay-at-home mom, how the 2016 election awakened her to the importance of being civically engaged in her local community, how she raises her children to be informed, responsible, and good stewards of their community, starting the marketing firm with her younger sisters, and how they use their corporate experiences to serve small companies. So this was definitely a pleasure to interview Quiana, and it was long overdue to do as well. So without further ado, let's get into the episode. So thank you so much for being on the show today. Can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Yes, my name is Quiana Abgai, and I'm originally from Columbus, Ohio. I live in Boston, Massachusetts now, but over the years, I've worked in marketing, advertising, and started a blog back in 2009 when I was living in New York City. And so from that point, about 10 years ago, my blog has really been a platform for me to jump off and do some really interesting creative things. So my primary focus right now is my children. Their ages 4 and 8. And one of the things that's been really wonderful about some of the things that I do, which I look forward to getting into a little bit more, is being able to really be an example for them and to have a flexible schedule to do some of the things that I'm really passionate about, and also find ways to make a difference in my community. So that's my background. I live in Boston now. It's kind of like a return to Boston. I came back here in 2016 because of my husband's job, but I had graduated from Wellesley College in 2002, just to kind of, give that timeline perspective. But right now I run a consulting company with my 2 sisters. One's in graphic design, one's in PR. And with my background in marketing, we bring those services to small businesses through our consulting company, Trifecta Media Group. And then through my blog, Harlem Lovebirds, I've been able to do some speaking engagements and things at social media conferences, speaking more so to the social justice activism piece, which I got activated in 2014 when I was living in Portsmouth, New Hampshire for 2 years during the election season. So everything I do kind of ties together with the theme of motherhood, social change, and really showing up to make a difference.
Yeah, so great. So you gave us a lot of information. So let's back up to college and talking about what it was like going to Wellesley. Like you said, you're originally from Columbus, Ohio. So talk about coming to the Boston area to go to college. What did you go to college for? And talk a little bit about your college experience.
Definitely. So I went to an all-girls school in Columbus, Ohio from 8th through 12th grade. It was a secular school, and they really challenged our skills when it comes to critical thinking and being able to engage with people of different backgrounds. And it was just really a wonderful experience. I graduated in a class of 50 something women, and my guidance counselor at the time, my senior year, was really pushing for me to accept Wellesley College. And I had about 6 schools, and I can still see the list in my head. Wellesley was last on the list. I took a black Sharpie and scratched it out. And I said, after attending an all-girls school, I actually wanted to go to college that was predominantly male. So I was at the time, I'd had enough of the single-sex environment. But I went to Spring Open Campus at Wellesley, and my guidance counselor arranged that trip. And I had such an amazing time. I met some incredible students and other perspectives. And I remember calling home from Boston Logan to my mother in Columbus, Ohio, on my way back, saying, "Mom, I'm going to go to Wellesley." And so the fact that I made that 180 was just proof positive of what an impact that visit was. And down the line, when I accepted and being on campus, I arrived on campus 21 years ago. I can still remember that feeling and knowing that I had made the right decision. So I studied psychology. I was a psychology major and economics minor. I had done an internship when I was in high school on the behavior of shopping and kind of what does that look like in retail spaces. It was a month-long internship in New York City that I did senior year. We have a program called May Program at my high school, Columbus School for Girls. And we could come up with this program, you pitch it, you figure out your housing. And it was really a great way to start to learn independence and how to make moves in the real world. And it all came about just because I saw their program on or the Cable Entertainment Network, and reached out to them and said, "I'm a senior in high school. Can I come and help you?" And, coming from Ohio to New York City kind of brushed me off. But eventually I wore them down and got some recommendations and was able to stay with a family friend who supported me during that month and made such a great impression. I came back my first year that summer while at Wellesley and did a paid internship with them down the line while at Wellesley. My senior year, did an internship at Arnold ad agency in Boston, and then ended up getting hired by them in the media planning department. So allocating our clients' budgets across traditional media, so TV, radio, print, and out of home, so like billboards. So we did that for certain clients like Volkswagen. So I did that starting out and then switched client side over to work at Fidelity Investments in their marketing department before moving on to New York City in 2007. And so we stayed. By that point, I was working at an agency, a small independent agency, and was engaged, then got pregnant, and then decided to stay home to be with my daughter, and then had a son in 2014. So one in 2010, one in 2014. And it's kind of been a whirlwind from there. But the experience at Wellesley College, I was actually there over this weekend for reunion. It wasn't my reunion, but this year and last year, I spoke at reunion with the work that I do with Wellesley Racial Justice Initiative. We held a couple anti-racism sessions with alums, and it was wonderful to be back on campus and think about what a formative experience that was, and to see people like Madeleine Albright and Hillary Clinton, who were also on campus this weekend, reminded me of the reason why I went to Wellesley, because I saw the type of women and the moves that they were making in the world. And I decided, you know what, I want to be on that level. I want to be in that environment. And these are some of the types of things that I want to do. And that's been a motivator for me since then, since graduating in 2002. And it's only a blessing now to be back in Boston in such close proximity to the college. And I actually recently was elected as the vice president of the Boston Alumni Club. So that's a new role that I'll be doing for the next couple of years. So everything has come full circle, and it's been a really exciting time to be back in Boston and to be engaged locally. And now that we're entrenched here in the community, we're first-time homeowners in 2016 when we came back. So to really put down roots after moving around a lot, it's really important to me to show my children how to be engaged in the community, how to be a small business owner, the care that I give to them, and to model that for them so that they can see an example of a parent who's present, who's engaged, and who shows up.
And like you said, everything kind of just like came full circle for you, going to college out here and then, bouncing around, going to New York, which is obviously a big ad and marketing market. And then, having children, deciding to stay home, coming here because your husband got work out here. So tell us a little bit about the blog Harlem Lovebirds that you have right now and that you've had for quite some time. Talk about what it started off as originally. Is it something that you did as a hobby because you were staying home with kids? Or talk about a little bit like the origins of it and then what it's kind of evolved to and transformed into today.
Yes. So Harlem Lovebirds, I started in 2009. I was a newlywed living in Harlem, working at a small media agency. And I had kept a written journal since I was 7 years old. At the arrival of my little sister, I have two sisters and a brother who are 8, 10, and 12 years younger than I am. And I saw blogging kind of like a continuation of my written journal. Think of like Doogie Howser, the show, from what was that, the 80s, the kid who used to type on his computer and keep a journal. So I saw it as a digital journal. I didn't realize people were really making lucrative income. This was 2009. Social media wasn't what it is right now, but working in the advertising industry, we were working with the digital arm of our agency at the time. And so they'd hire bloggers. We weren't calling them influencers or anything like that, but you could get a display ad on their blog and things like that. But I didn't think of myself in that way. I just thought, I'll have an online journal of my family, my newlywed experience living in Harlem, and kind of write about what is that like having an urban family, and especially having grown up in Columbus, Ohio. It was a great way to just keep a log of what was like, and for friends and family to check in and see what we were up to in New York City. And then I started getting contacted to see, would you be interested in receiving product or writing a review or writing a sponsored post? And there were other bloggers I was starting to notice at the time who were doing those types of things. And I said, oh, wow, if I could write a post or get free product or get paid, then that serves a purpose. As a mother, I wasn't working full time anymore. So if it was, hey, get a product for my baby or for my family, I saw value in that. And then I started to do things such as brand ambassadorships in New York City. I worked with Go-Go Squeeze to kind of show up and be the face of that company. They make the applesauce pouches for children. And so I was able to work with them, which was really great. And, having a flexible schedule, I did it while I was pregnant. And then to be able to bring my daughter once she was born, it was a really great partnership to work with them. And the fact I learned at that time how important it was for your followers to really engage organically and determine what your brand is, and to partner with products that you really truly believe in. And so starting that vetting process of figuring out, do I want to accept this product? Do I want to work with this brand? Because as time wore on and mommy bloggers started to become really popular, it was fast-paced fielding offers and things of that nature. What really changed for me with the blog was when we relocated to Portsmouth, New Hampshire in 2014, when I had just had my son. And it was that fall, and we were heading there, and I kind of make the best of wherever we end up. My husband's in sales and has worked in the New England region, which is why we've kind of bounced around a bit. But I determined at that point, moving up to New Hampshire, that I needed something a little more flexible. And we, were thinking about how long we'd stay there. We weren't sure, but I had also been in touch with my sisters who were in New York City and, coming off as fresh college graduates working in graphic design and PR. Sometimes we'd send freelance clients to each other. Someone might need a PR pitch, or someone might need a logo design or some marketing assistance and, help with their LinkedIn bio. So we were sending little independent projects to each other. And my dad had the idea, he said, why don't you guys just formally organize in 2014? I said, well, that makes sense because I'm relocating. I looked into it, and the arrangements for setting up an LLC in New Hampshire versus New York were more favorable. It was easier to do, and it was less costly. And I said, you know what, let's go ahead and do that. So that started in 2014, and we were able to formally take on clients. I was still able to blog, but leaving New York City for Portsmouth, New Hampshire was a big change. And that was something I actually wrote about, especially from a diversity perspective. And, I realized I was taking a lot of that for granted once I got to New Hampshire and being such a homogenous place. But the way I operate with my children and anywhere I am, I just show up. If I see something that interests me or there's something happening in any community, I come. I don't worry if there's going to be people who look like me or not. I'm there for the experience. I'm there to enrich my children's lives and to make sure that they're getting exposed to things, that enrich them. And so I started showing up in New Hampshire. I wasn't blogging as frequently, but because of the political season, it being 2014, the end of 2014, going into the 2016 election, I saw how many candidates were coming to the state, how politically active citizens were in New Hampshire. And I hadn't been activated in that way when I lived in New York City and, before that in Boston. And then with my children and starting to hear news of gun violence in schools and, Sandy Hook had happened. And I started to think, I have a daughter about to enter kindergarten and I'm home with my son. We're outward facing a lot. I'm not writing on the blog. Maybe I need to start to think about other ways to show up and be civically engaged, and started looking into other ways that I could be present. And so I would take my children to political events. When the candidates were coming to New Hampshire, my children were coming with me. I was explaining to them, as much as they could understand. My son was really little. But for my daughter, at least, she could understand. She had been on Wellesley's campus. She knew Hillary Clinton. She knew who she was. She had known who Barack Obama was. And then going into this election, she was very forward as a kindergartner to even say to me, Mom, we really need to hear all the candidates. And so when the current president, when he showed up in New Hampshire, and she said, Mommy, I think we should hear what he has to say, I respected that and had to explain to her because of the way that he incites violence and the way that his supporters were showing up for her safety, that I could not bring her to those events because we had started to see what happens, when Black and brown people would show up at his events. And so I appreciated her saying that. It let me know that she was watching, and it kind of made me double down on activism so that by the time in 2016 we got to Boston, I was starting to notice a shift in my social media presence. Instagram was picking up. There were ways for me to pitch to speak at various conferences and leverage the work that I had already done, the past, at that point, 2009 to 2016. So all those years of writing really paid off and leveraging relationships so that I didn't have to write as frequently, but people started to know who I was and to be able to pitch to speak at conferences like Blog Her. I was speaking at Blogalicious, and also speaking at Altitude Summit and Mom 2.0. So the opportunities to speak and show up beyond the blog is kind of what's propelled me to the positions that I'm at right now. So doing the Wellesley Racial Justice Initiative, being the Boston Community Outreach Lead for Moms Demand Action. So as in that role, being a liaison to other anti-gun violence organizations. So showing up for them. Also in this work that I'll now be doing with the alumni club here in Boston and leveraging more formal relationships with the college and the community. And also through my work, we have the equivalent of Humans of New York here in my neighborhood. I don't disclose where I live. I live in Boston, but as far from a privacy perspective, it's really important that I show up. So I write the feature that's in my community, the monthly equivalent of Humans of New York. So I do that here. I go out once a month to publish that. It puts me out there to meet people that I probably would just pass, if I saw them in the street. But it's been a wonderful way to forge meaningful relationships and, to get from behind the screen, because I think it's really easy to get caught up in your devices and not to have those interpersonal relationships where you're looking people in the eye, when you're having challenging conversations. Not everyone agrees, with my viewpoints, but I think it's important to not shy away from engaging in real life.
Awesome. So, that is a lot to talk about as far as where your blog came from as like an online diary to something that you were using to help, get products and, some extra income for your family to something that is a little bit more meaningful and purposeful as far as being engaged in your community and also being able to set that example for your children as well, too. So, it's obviously been a few years since the 2016 election. So since we have this upcoming election, tell us a little bit about like how that 2016 election cycle, what kind of an impression it left on your children, at least, especially your oldest daughter, and kind of how is she gearing up for this upcoming election? And is your son kind of involved in some of this other stuff now that he's a little bit older and if he understands?
Yes. So she, at the time, my daughter was very much like, Mommy, why do we have to go to this event? Why are we doing this? And so it was kind of like, you're dragging me around to things and explaining to her why we do show up. We don't keep the news on. Sometimes I'll listen to NPR or I'll gauge what she's hearing at school with different incidents that might happen. But to keep it very age appropriate, she's 8. She reads at a 7th grade level, and she's doing math at a 5th grade level. So I keep all of that in mind. I want her to enjoy being a child and not be overburdened by the things that are happening in the world. But for example, this weekend with Moms Demand Action, it was Wear Orange Day. We had an event in the community, like a festival, and members of the community who were working towards ending gun violence, as well as local politicians. There was a poetry slam. They were looking for performers. And my daughter, as a writer, I signed her up, and she was kind of like put off by that. And it was a struggle. But I explained to her when she asked me, Mommy, why did you sign me up? And I said, well, you have a voice that needs to be heard. You're an excellent writer. She's into theater. And I said, let's use some of these interests and gifts that you have to speak up about some of the things that are happening in the world and talk about peace and how we care for others. And so instead of necessarily focusing on individual candidates, so I'm really careful about that, especially because with the current president, you never know what's going to come out. Some of the language that's used isn't language that I'd want my children to use. And so unlike previous presidents, I have to be very careful to screen that for my children and, protect them from that, but to understand that it motivates us to want to do better, how we represent ourselves, how we engage with others. And so looking ahead to the next election, my daughter doesn't quite have a concept yet of what's at stake. She knows something's coming, but I think as it narrows down and we start to hear candidates, come together, we'll probably start to put together some opportunities for her to hear from them directly, video clips and things of that nature, so that we can start to build her critical thinking skills. She's actually was motivated because some of the antagonistic situations that were happening at her school, she wanted to step up and create her own organization. And so she started Kids in a New Dawn came up with a logo, designed a t-shirt all on her own on the Custom Ink website, and made a platform to talk about her bullying with fellow students, and approached her teacher and the principal. And she and her friend wear these t-shirts, and they're kind of ambassadors of this movement that she created. They have posters all over the school, and that wasn't something I, directed her to do. It was just that she came home one day in tears because of some things that were happening at school. And I said, let's use this emotion and let's challenge it, or let's channel it into action. And I think she's seen me do that as well, to use my emotion over the current state of affairs in our country to channel that into action. And so by seeing her do that, seeing her take my example and kind of run with it, it's been really motivating for me. And, not to overburden her, but to kind of let her watch and suggest things to her and things that she wants to try and do. I explained to her my role as a mother, to make sure that she grows up into an independent, resilient, kind, and productive adult. So she very much understands like my own job description as her mother, and also to be an example for her little brother. So he doesn't quite have a concept of things that are happening yet in the world as a rising kindergartner, but we do talk about how we treat others, how we engage. Our community has a cleanup effort. We show up and do that. We plant bulbs and things of that nature. So I think it's really important, age appropriately and developmentally, to engage your children. We read lots of books about those type of subjects. Let's Talk About Race is one of them that we find really helpful in the classroom. And I've got into my daughter's class to read that before, especially when there were some concerning racial incidents that had happened at her school. So I just keep a pulse on things. And as my kindergartner, as my son enters kindergarten, it's something that I'll stay on top of as well, and making sure that I find age appropriate ways to engage him. An Instagram account that's really great for that is Here We Read. That's one of my favorites, and it's We, WEE. That really gives me some great resources for my children. So I keep my antenna up at all times to find those types of things for both of them.
Great. And actually, I did end up purchasing that book because I saw that you posted it. Let's Talk About Race. So I actually did get that for my 8-year-old too. And I find that very helpful too. Like when I'm trying to explain things like, he's 8. So we've talked about slavery. The sex talk is coming up. So I always find it easier to explain and easier for him to comprehend when we have a book or we have something that can kind of help explain beyond my own explanation. So I'm definitely that type of parent too. So tell us a little bit about your consulting agency that you have with your sisters. I know that we talked about a lot, and you mentioned it very early on in your introduction. So, dive into that a little bit and explain how you started it and what that's kind of transformed into today.
Yes. So Trifecta Media Group started in 2014 to champion small businesses in the areas of graphic design, PR, and marketing. So when me and my sisters were sending freelance work to each other, it was a more formalized way to kind of bring all of our skills under one umbrella. And so my sisters and I, we've each, worked at very large agencies, firms of that nature in New York City. They're still in New York City, my two sisters. But having worked at large agencies and for clients with huge budgets, one of the things that we noticed was a lot of times smaller businesses, entrepreneurs especially, were in need of these types of services, but they couldn't commit to, like a 5 or 6 figure monthly retainer fee. But there were skills that each of us had that we could scale down to provide those for small businesses. And so just from word of mouth, we started being able to pick up clients starting back in 2014. And we somehow had started attracting a lot of healthcare providers, wellness providers, people in the space, some, tech companies who were more so in the space of health and wellness. And so there wasn't a strategic marketing plan that we needed to go after these types of clients, but we just started to notice who was being referred to us, who was finding us. And while we don't have a formal outward client recruitment process, a lot of what's happening is just via word of mouth right now. My commitment very much so is to my 4 and 8-year-olds, so primarily, in the caregiver role right now. But it was really important to have something established for my current life stage, and also for my sisters. They don't have children. One is newlywed. So to be able to have this company established for us as we think long-term wealth building and independence, and being able to grow this brand for ourselves and to be in service to small business owners. So what we find is a lot of the small businesses that come to us, they may need help with a launch. They may need some help with visual branding to get together their branding guide. They may need some help with a pitch to find media outlets or to come up with marketing strategy and kind of get themselves organized. So when we start out with companies, a lot of times, as small business owners, they may have been trying to wing it on their own. But a lot of times when they're coming to us, they just need some help bringing everything together. And rather than outsource to say, okay, you got my marketing strategy together, let's go find you a publicist, once everything is planned out and visually presentable, they're able to get all of those types of services that work really well together under one umbrella. And to have the flexibility with budgets, that's something that we bring to the table, as well as contract limits. So we may have some clients, who are in the position to work with us 6 to 9 months, some who want a multi-year contract, some who might want to quote unquote pick our brain. So we have an ongoing retainer structure that works out for clients who want, to consult with us on an as-needed basis. So I think the flexibility that we bring for small business owners is really valuable. The level of expertise we bring because of the caliber of clients that we've worked on is really important. And in the health and wellness space, because we've attracted those types of clients with the current state of affairs in our country, we're finding such an importance placed on issues of health and wellness, and healthcare providers, who in and of their own selves are starting to become brands that are starting to show up and provide services and to use social media to talk to the public about health and mental health, especially. And I think it's been wonderful to be able to see this develop over the past 5 years. Our goal as we enter our 5th year this fall is to talk about what are ways that we can broaden our outreach and start to bring more clients on board in a public way versus just word of mouth. So creating our own marketing strategy, expanding the types of clients that we bring on board. And from a personal level, as my son enters kindergarten and my daughter enters 4th grade, with them becoming more independent, I do want to continue to show up for them, but I also want to do more from a financial perspective to contribute to my family in that way. And money isn't everything, but I think it's important, to recognize my husband's been extremely supportive of me and my business pursuits. And I think in any partnership, especially financially, it's important to take some of that financial burden off of his shoulders. And I think, that's something that I saw my own parents model, in cycles with parents working and outside of the home and not working or starting their own businesses and focusing on me and my 3 siblings. My parents modeled that beautifully for me. And I'm in a position now with my children gaining more independence that I want to return to some of those more career financial pursuits and goals, as we think long term, for our family.
Great, great. So I know that you kind of discussed a lot of, kind of the mix between your personal family and your actual work life. And that's probably partially because, like you said, you're a work from home mom who's kind of set your own schedule and gotten into your own entrepreneurial and civic community-based endeavors. So is there like a pivotal moment in your life that kind of helped create you to be the person that you are? Or have we kind of already discussed that?
The pivotal moment, I guess there were kind of 2, and it was really interesting being at Wellesley's reunion over the weekend. I remember I'd interviewed the author of How to Be Less Stupid About Race yesterday, and we both shared in common having a sociology 101 professor, Ira Silver. And I remember specifically being in his class and coming from Columbus, Ohio, and having had, a somewhat sheltered experience, but coming to Boston, and yes, my girls' school was very, critical thinking oriented and all of that, but being in that Sociology 101 class was the beginning of what I call my awakening and kind of thinking about my position in the world and the ability to make an impact. And so we were reading books like Ain't No Making It and discussing racism and systemic issues and things that we see more so talked about now. But at the time, looking to get into advertising, I knew at that point at Wellesley that, that was my senior year when I took Sociology 101, but I knew that I was going into the advertising field. And I think in that regard, it helped me become more critical of the news media and my consumption. And so from that point, by the time I got into creating my own blog after working in the advertising industry and then getting into, social media and all of that, once I got to New Hampshire in 2014 and kind of got awakened for the second time through the political season, 2014 to 2016, I would consider that my second awakening. And so when I was working in the advertising industry, you kind of just are assigned clients. You never know what you're going to get. You might ask, hey, can I work on this new account? But really, they just kind of move you around like a pawn and put you where they want you to be. So I think by the time I got to the election season and I wasn't working in the ad industry, but starting to think about this consulting company, Trifecta Media Group, I really wanted to be intentional about the type of clients that we were helping. And from a small business perspective, being able to make those interpersonal connections instead of from the corporate world where I felt that there was the opportunity to do more meaningful work and make an impact and also to make an income, to start to bring on clients that were, working towards creating their own brands and their own businesses. And us as Trifecta Media Group, as a small business owner, our clients also as small business owners, there was a level of camaraderie that I saw there and I continue to see that brings more satisfaction than when I was, agency side. And so in all that I do now, and I think it's really important that we do this when we consider our place in whatever industry we're in, that yes, we want to pay the bills and put food on the table and all of those types of things, but to find ways that we can give back and influence our communities and be intentional about the work we do. And when things don't sit well with us, to have the wherewithal to speak up about that, even if you are in a corporate place, to be able to be a disruptor and to find those people in that space to speak up and to enact social change. Because businesses are people ultimately, and I think it's very easy to lose that insight and to think of them as strictly institutions. But there's something to be said for recognizing the importance of the person-to-person connection. And not everyone can go and start an independent consulting company, but I think that you start where you're at and start to make change there. And kind of those two pivotal moments, taking that sociology class and then moving to New Hampshire, I kind of see those as the critical points that kind of changed my trajectory to where I'm at right now.
Great. So as we kind of begin to conclude, give me like one piece of advice that you would give to a woman who you feel is like yourself, somebody who, maybe traveled for college, got engaged, ended up moving around, started a family, and is focusing on both being the best parent that they can be, while at the same time also being enterprising and being a part of their own community.
My advice would be to really take a moment to pause when you're overwhelmed. I think right now I'm speaking from a very exhausted place just because of recency of what just happened this weekend with all the activities I was involved in. But I think to recognize when you need to take a break, when you are overwhelmed, and to not feel like you have to do all the things. And that's something I constantly struggle with. I would look at where you can make an impact with what you want to do. So understanding, my children are in a very needy place. my spouse might need me right now, or my partner might need me, but to realize, what is one thing that I can do in the area of family, in the area of my partnerships, in the area of business, or personal development, so that you don't feel like we're overwhelmed and feeling like I'm doing all the things, but I'm doing nothing, right? And I get that sense of myself. A lot of times I have to step back. Sometimes I have to sit down and make a list of the things like, wow, I did accomplish all these things, because it's very easy in the digital age to just keep a running tally of a to-do list. So I think even if you have to retroactively go back and make a checklist and then check it off to make yourself feel better, if you have to journal it out, whatever it is, to give yourself grace, to give empathy even to yourself, to acknowledge that each day is a success, and to reflect and realize, what, I may have not been my best in this particular area, but the next day is an opportunity to do better. So please be gentle with yourself. I've seen how things, if you had told me a few years ago, hey, you're going to be back in Boston, I would have laughed. But to realize the way things are is not necessarily how they will be. And that for me, being able to write that down and track that in some way along a timeline, if you can't journal everything out, but to write it on a calendar and have some time to reflect and give yourself that credit for how far you've come. Especially mothers, we can be so hard on ourselves, and I think we need to give ourselves more grace. That would be my advice to anyone who finds themselves in a similar position, who wants to be entrepreneurial but wants to focus also on the needs of their family life.
Great. So where can we find you? How do we follow you on social media? What are the links for your websites? How do we get in touch with you?
Yeah, so my blog is harlemlovebirds.com, and across social media, Instagram is where I'm most active, but I also have a Facebook and Twitter, but it's all at Harlem Lovebirds, all one word. And then my company, Trifecta Media Group, we do consulting work. We have a landing page if any of what I've shared was interesting to any small business owners who might need graphic design, PR, or marketing consulting services. It's trifectamediagroup.com. And of course, I'll give you, Lindsay, all of my links and everything directly. And, Instagram is absolutely my favorite. I do a lot of Instagram stories. My kids sometimes show up, but it really gives you a picture, a lot of, in the day-to-day life of all of the things that I do and where I show up.
Great. So thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me, Lindsay. This has been wonderful.
And there you have it. Thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode of the Go Getter Showcase. Please make sure that you rate, review, and subscribe on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and SoundCloud. Also, check out the Greater Now membership program for a number of perks, including a bonus semi-exclusive podcast episode, as well as our rewards program where you can earn points for engaging with our content. You can find that at www.mygreaternow.com/membership. Until next time, take care.